With growing international pressure from some of our strongest allies to embrace a net zero emissions target, Australia is at a climate change crossroad.
The signs are unmistakable. The science is undeniable. But the cost of inaction just keeps mounting.
But our response hasn't exactly instilled any confidence.
Australia is on the pathway to net zero. Our goal is to get there as soon as we possibly can.
Now, an Australia Institute report says Australia has already spent $10.3 billion of taxpayers' money on fossil fuel subsidies, and the financial year isn't even over. It's mostly through the federal diesel fuel rebate and works out to be $19,686 in handouts every minute.
A subsidy is anything that creates a benefit for a fossil fuel producer or a major fossil fuel user. What we've done is get the numbers straight from the government's own figures in their budget papers, in the annual reports of government-owned enterprises, and put together a list of these measures.
But the government says the report is flawed.
The report itself made a lot of claims which very clearly weren't subsidies. And when it comes to the diesel fuel rebate, if they're seriously suggesting that fixed and stationary diesel engines shouldn't be entitled to a rebate on what is effectively a tax on road use, well, I just think that's a nonsense.
There could be some logic to that argument. All of these trucks and trains, as well as the heavy machinery used on mine sites, don't contribute to the wear and tear of public roads. What do you reckon, Rod?
It's amazing that a minister in the federal government would say something that is so clearly wrong. Road funding hasn't been linked to the fuel tax since the 1950s.
Further complicating the issue, fossil fuel rebates don't only benefit the fossil fuel industry.
I mean, what are they suggesting? That the diesel fuel rebate shouldn't be provided to Indigenous communities that use diesel fuel for their generation? I mean, this is something which affects people who operate trawlers, for example. Farmers who have got diesel generators and diesel pumps are sitting on their farms.
But the Institute reckons you can support people and business without tying the rebates to their fossil fuel use.
At the moment, the more fossil fuel you burn, the more tax you save. And that's not what we want. We want to potentially support industries, but we should be doing it in a way that doesn't tie their support to the damage they cause to the climate.
Ultimately, the only way to practically reduce emissions is to burn less fossil fuel. So what would happen if we stopped paying these subsidies?
These are costs to the budget, and so in most cases they can be phased out, and the people who benefit are the Australian communities through increased government revenue.
Still, the government insists that between now and 2050, technology will make fossil fuel cleaner. So coal, gas and these subsidies look like they're hanging around.
There is 1 million direct and indirect jobs associated with the resources sector, and those taxes that are paid by those hard-working men and women right across the sector is how we pay for those critical and essential services that Australians rely on. Hospitals, schools, roads. I mean, which ones do you suggest we close?
So here's what I think is really interesting about this, because we've been listening to this argument in Australia for over a decade now, and we're familiar with the lines that are pushed on both sides of this. What's happening in America right now is really interesting, because Joe Biden has announced this multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure and investment package. A lot of it is going into renewables. And he's stolen the language that you just heard there from Keith Pitt, our resources minister. So all the lines you've been hearing about the reasons we can't do anything about climate and the reasons we can't get out of fossil fuels, Joe Biden's sort of grabbing that and saying, actually, if we want jobs, if we want growth, if we want these regional communities to survive, we're going to have to invest in renewables, and that is actually the future. So I reckon we're going to start to see some change around this, because the language is being stolen by the other side.
Well, they're going to have to accept that change, aren't they? Because if you think that that's where it is going, government investing in it will put America where they need to be and we'll become laggards. It's as simple as that.
Feels weird to be trailing behind America, doesn't it?
The bottom 20% get nothing. They're really unfair tax cuts.
People want to see much stronger action from the government when it comes to climate change.
It's no coincidence that we have a wages crisis in Australia.
Transitioning to net zero emissions, it doesn't seem like there's much room for gas.